Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Speaking Through the Fog. Today I'm going to be talking about something I think is really awesome, which is float therapy. It's really helped me. It's helped me talking. It's helped my brain fog. It really just gave me energy. I'm out of bed actually doing stuff. It's great. So I wanted to give you guys a little bit of information on it, but I like to give you guys actual scientific information so you can make up your own minds about it. So, this episode is going to be about float therapy. And float therapy, um, most people know it about as it um, is called sensory deprivation. It also, they interchange float, isolation, tank, and pod. So you go into a float tank or an isolation pod or float pod, any of those are right. And it started basically because this guy was, or everybody was kind of thinking, what would we do if we stuck somebody in a box and we left them alone for a while and we took away all their senses? And people did it different ways, but the way sensory deprivation as we know it now, John C. Lilly invented the first deprivation tank, and among that he also did electric field stimulation and mapped the pain pleasure pathways in the brain. So his first tank was 160 gallons of water, and you'd be fully submerged, and you'd have this big old like scuba mask, like the one you see in, Leagues Under the Sea kind of thing, and you'd wear these black goggles over it that were completely blacked out, and you'd have a tube to breathe through. And so, of course, not every Joe Schmo could go do this. This is pretty intense, and um, he was known for that, but he was also known because he would do that, take LSD, and then he also created a new science involving human whale interspecies communication. And he would combine all of them and do it himself. And he wrote this big paper on when he did it, that he heard from aliens in other dimensions in the meeting of the three minds. And he also ran an experiment that was kind of famous where, in the 60s, for a woman who was living with a dolphin for 10 weeks. So he's a little crazy, he's a little genius, he's got both. But also in the 50s, there was reports that sensory deprivation can cause slower processing mentally, hallucinations, mood swings, and anxiety attacks. And that was because McGill University said that they had done sensory deprivation, but what they had actually done is flashed really bright white light in people's faces and then played really loud, constant noise all at the same time. And it would drive people basically insane. And they were saying it was a good way to like study psychosis. And that is not sensory deprivation, that's sensory overload. And sensory overload bothers even the worst of people. So, then there was also another study in the 1950s where they did use actual sensory deprivation tank, but they made them really, really nervous before they went in by telling them there's a panic button and you probably will panic, so here it's right here. And then they were also, made them stay down there as long as possible and weren't necessarily there to pull them out after an hour. So they were down there until they were bored and scared, and they were also, in this big scuba suit standing in water. I mean, it's not very comfortable. So them being anxious or whatever, of course that would be the case. Also, the government in the 50s ran an experiment where they put a whole bunch of people in a room or by themselves in a room and put gloves over their hands and covered their eyes, and there's nobody there to make sounds, and made them live like that for like 2 or 3 weeks. And then these people were going insane and hearing hallucinations and stuff. But that's, I mean, again, this would never get past the human board of scientific experimentation now. So a lot of people thought sensory deprivation was a bad thing, or it was scary, or it, did the opposite of what it does. They also thought it was a whole bunch of hippie mumbo jumbo, like people taking acid and doing this sensory deprivation thing. So it really was not even talked about until the 1980s. And they had studies with it since then, but it was really kind of on the down low and people doing it kind of by themselves, very small studies. But people started to get them in spas, sports medicine, gyms, hospitals, sports clubs, and it was really word of mouth. Like one person would do it, think it was really awesome, get somebody else to come, and it started gaining popularity until in 2004 or 2011 there was 85 float centers in the US. In 2014 there was 250. Now I believe it's just growing more and more. And they found that, like, in research studies, they had 100 volunteers come to this research study for floating, and of those 100, only 2 of them didn't do the whole session because they didn't like how it felt. That's only 2% of people not liking it. So 98% of people can do the full thing. That's awesome. So the whole reason it's become popular is because recently they think people's brains, because of technology and the way we have such a big stress on commerce and getting a job and paying your bills, it's really put us in this stressful fight or flight stage. And I'm sure you've heard, which most people have, that people are way too overstressed. So one thing that are before I get into all the science and stuff, they've found scientifically, these are all this scientific stuff, because float spas will say all different kinds of things that floating will cure. And yes, it probably does, but there isn't science backing it up. It's just by their experience with their clients. But what it does do is it reduces blood pressure, it lowers the heart rate, it relieves muscle tension, it helps with oxygen and blood supply by vasodilation. It dilates the veins, arteries, and capillaries, which helps with nutrient distribution through the body. It helps distribute magnesium to every cell of the body, helps with concentration, boosts creativity, helps athletic ability. It cures fatigue and jet lag. It energizes, it increases motivation. It's a meditation aid. It can help habits such as smoking or eating and promote weight loss. It helps the left and the right side of the brain synchronize to where you're using both. You get mental clarity and alertness. It speeds up the pain and injury recovery, and it boosts immune function. So these are all things that they've done studies on, and they can scientifically prove that it does. The science community, though, isn't really doing that many studies on it, because if you're listening to this list going, well, if it cures all this, why isn't this something people have heard about? Well, I could get into everything, but the long story short is the people who usually fund treatments, which are the drug companies, they're not really wanting to put money into flotation therapy because the drug companies wouldn't be making any money off of it. So anybody who's putting money into it are other donors, and there's not very many of them out there. So everything is just word of mouth at this point, other than the small studies that have been done. So before floating, you're going to not want to shave or wax, because any cuts or irritated skin are going to really hurt when you go in. And you're going to want to eat a small meal prior to floating. You also don't want to drink too much caffeine too close to float time, because you don't want to be already kind of anxious when you go in. You want to be able to relax. And you want to use the restroom right before you go, and you want to stop drinking pretty close to that too, because you don't want to be focusing on your bladder the whole time you're in there. And the eating that's another thing. I learned this the hard way too. If you don't eat at least a small meal before you go, your stomach's gonna be growling, and it's gonna take away completely. All you're gonna be thinking about is how much you want this to be done so you can go get something to eat. So the float tanks themselves are usually on average around 8 feet long and 4.5 feet wide. They can range in heights. They have some that are full rooms. People who are claustrophobic tend to not be as bad in float tanks because they can get really big. You can keep the lid open. You can keep the lights on. You're very much in control while you're there. They put 850 to 1,200 pounds of salt in there, and the water will be about 10 to 12 inches deep. And then they make sure to keep it heated at anywhere from 93.8 to 95.7 degrees, which is skin temperature. It's going to be lower than blood temperature, and it's going to feel kind of silky, soft, buttery. I say it feels like the best bed you've ever laid on. And the temperature being at this neutralizes the water skin receptor and the tactile sensation, so it literally starts to feel like you don't know where the water and the your skin kind of stop. It feels all kind of, it starts to feel like you're just kind of floating in air. Um, and you put your ears underwater. It's in a soundproof room. You usually put in earplugs. That cuts off the sound. You turn the lights off in the room. It's usually a light-proof room. You turn off the light of the pod, and the pod itself has a light-proof barrier, so there's no sight or light going on. So, and when you're lying in the water, it's not like lying on a mattress. Actually, it's you're not ever uncomfortable, so you don't have to roll to try to get comfortable or anything. You just lay on your back, and your blood flows just really evenly, and it allows your capillaries to open because you're laying in a way that's not pressing on anything. So that's when you first get in, that's benefits right there. So while you're in the tank, the hypothesis for the reason why people are getting so sick nowadays is because we're in a constant stress state from working, worrying about work, bills, mortgage, kids, etc. We're just perfectly on when it comes to being stressed. And we were made to only be stressed if we thought, a predator was going to eat us, or we weren't going to get food. So all this stress we're putting on us constantly overworks our system, and we're not able to really do much else other than stretch. So the hypothesis, even with chronic fatigue syndrome, is that our immune system is spiked because of a virus, and it burns out your immune system. Well, same thing, you spike stress levels and you're burning all this stuff in your body, you're going to start having problems. So they think that's why you benefit so much from doing rest therapy, but it also is thought to help with burnout and chronic fatigue syndrome. So that's the first part of the floating therapy. There's going to be two parts, unfortunately. I'm sorry, I have a lot of information I'm really excited about. So I am not going to make these updates on Monday and Friday. It's just going to be one after the other because I don't think that this is really important enough to break off that far apart. So B is going to be tomorrow.